Now, in this week's Let's Talk Some Star Wars, we're going to be taking a look at the results of, and your comments from, the poll that asked, how important do you think it is that the Force Ghost of Anakin Skywalker, played of course by Hayden Christensen, shows up in Episode 9? And if we jump right in and take a look at the results, we see that 37% of people said it was extremely important and you simply can't end this trilogy, and presumably the whole Skywalker Saga, without him. There was also another 19% who said it was very important, with 24% saying it was somewhat important, 14% saying not that important, and 7% who really thought it'd be a mistake to include him. And honestly here, I was slightly surprised by these results. I thought the idea of Anakin being in Episode 9 might get even a bit more love than it already did here, and that a larger majority would be all for his return as a Force Ghost in Episode 9. Because as our top-rated comment, which came to us from John Towry, said, if you're going to end the Skywalker Saga, you have to include the most important Skywalker, right? And yeah, I absolutely agree with that, because as I've said before, when you look at each trilogy as a part of a larger story, the prequels were about the fall of the Jedi, as well as Anakin. The original trilogy then was about the return of the Jedi and the redemption of Anakin. And the last trilogy, if you were really trying to serve the greater story, should have been about a test for the returned Jedi and dealing with the repercussions of Anakin's legacy. And say what you will about The Force Awakens, but that's exactly what J.J. Abrams seemed to be setting up with that movie. We had a grandson of Anakin Skywalker, Kylo Ren of course, apparently obsessed with the dark side version of his grandfather. Or in other words, we had a descendant of Anakin directly dealing with or worshipping his legacy and wanting to be the next Darth Vader. We then had Luke, who, after all his students were wiped out, abandoned everything and everyone he cared about to seek out the first Jedi Temple, which is of course a hell of a test for the newly established Jedi Order. And despite what Rian Johnson said about it being very difficult to think of a reason why Luke would go to that island, and coming up with that he just wanted to die and then considered that a good idea and ran with it, maybe all of Luke's students weren't wiped out. Maybe he and a few that survived went in search of the first Jedi Temple for answers, and he's been training them there for all this time. Or maybe he was looking for a way to defeat Snoke, or to find out who and what he actually is, since he doesn't seem to cause an imbalance in the Force. Maybe Rey then was a student Luke had lost a long time ago, one Ben had secretly killed, or thought he had killed, because he was jealous of how powerful she was. I mean, I don't know, it kind of sounds like an interesting dynamic between our two main characters, if part of the reason Ben fell to the dark side was because of Rey stealing the spotlight that he thought belonged to him. And this then gives Rey every reason to now hate Ben, or Kylo Ren, because he was the one who perhaps wiped her mind somehow and left her on Jakku, putting it in her head to wait for a family that was never coming back, because they didn't actually exist. But I digress, because I'm getting way off topic here. So let's move to another comment, this time from Blizzard Blade, who said, still wonder why he wasn't in The Force Awakens, let alone The Last Jedi. The saga is the story of Anakin Skywalker and his progeny, so where the F is Anakin's ghost? And that's kind of the million-dollar question here, isn't it? It goes beyond just where's Anakin's Force ghost. It makes us wonder where any of them have been, and what they've been doing for the past 30 years, since the end of Return of the Jedi. I mean, is Endor the last time Luke has seen any of them? Did none of them appear to him while he was rebuilding the Jedi Order? Did none of them ever speak to him about Ben? Maybe give him a little warning? Did they maybe try, but he didn't heed that warning and still thought he could train and save Ben? And this is kind of the problem with Force Ghosts in general, and one I've brought up before. Just what rules do they actually have to adhere to? Why do they show up sometimes, but not others? And yeah, I certainly realize if they always showed up to fix every single problem, we're not really going to have much of a story to tell. However, in Season 6 of the Clone Wars, we learn that they exist in a place that isn't exactly linear, and that time doesn't really have any sort of meaning to them anymore. But that only tends to imply they'd know the future, or likely future, and would be more prone to show up and help shape the course of events at key moments. And yet, as far as we know, Yoda showing up to Luke in The Last Jedi is the first time he's seen any of them since Endor, which begs the question, why then? And unfortunately for that moment, as JV says in their comment here, the inclusion of Yoda in The Last Jedi didn't seem to do much for the story, other than really make us wonder even more what the deal with Force Ghosts is, since Yoda called down lightning. But again, as this comment is saying, seeing Yoda again really didn't have an impact on me, not like I thought it should or would. And maybe that's because if we were going to get a scene between Luke and the Force Ghost of Yoda, I would have liked to have seen them speak to each other as sort of equals now, like two Jedi Masters conversing about something important to the plot of the story, not seeing the little mischievous version of Yoda, the one Luke first encounters before he even knows who this little green guy is, have to give him a pep talk of all things. Because I'm sorry, but it just doesn't resonate with me that after all this time, Yoda needed to, in a way, treat Luke like an untrained child again. And it's unfortunate we couldn't get a scene maybe of Luke speaking about some serious matter with all of the Force ghosts. And then at the end of that scene, all the ghosts save Anakin fade away, and we get a moment between just father and son talking about perhaps Ben. Anyway, not to get off track again or dive too deeply into the inner workings of Force ghosts here, but The Last Jedi only added more confusion into the mix concerning how they work exactly. And I'm going to guess that Yoda showed up to Luke at the moment he did, because he couldn't before that, because Luke had been shut off from the Force somehow. Though even if that is the reason Yoda showed up when he did, it doesn't begin to explain why none of the other Force ghosts showed up long before Luke cut himself off, and long before Ben fell to the dark side, to, maybe give him a little bit of a heads up. Unless they had warned him in the past, and instead of maybe having that explained to us in some respect or in some way, giving more context to Ben's fall to the dark side and why Luke reacted the way he did, time in the movie had to be given to other more important matters, like Canto Bight, for example. All kidding aside though, because I really don't want to turn this into just another Let's Bash The Last Jedi video, but I should at least make mention of the numerous comments, including the second highest rated one, which missed out on top honors by a mere 4 votes, that said something to the effect that they don't even care if Anakin is in there because they don't care about the sequel trilogy. And usually the reason given is because of what The Last Jedi did to the story. Which brings us to this comment, which came to us from ObiWan Kenobi, who said, "If you asked me this before the sequel started, I would absolutely say extremely important. However, The Last Jedi seems keen on making Star Wars history meaningless by distancing the new movies from the themes, plot, and characters of the previous films in the saga. This is not a good thing, but that's the way Disney seems to be handling things. So to make a real, impactful, and emotional Episode 9, you need to have Anakin Skywalker's ghost. In fact, I would argue he should have already shown up in the sequel trilogy, along with my Force ghost. That's what should happen, but I don't know if I have enough faith in Disney to properly conclude this saga, given their monumental failures in The Last Jedi." And look, as someone who loves Star Wars, and I'm going to make the wild assumption here that ObiWan Kenobi loves Star Wars as well, reading comments like this from presumably fellow fans who love this franchise kind of breaks my heart, because it's a little depressing that the topic I brought up was, do you think Anakin Skywalker, arguably the most important character in all of Star Wars, should appear in what will most likely be the end of the Skywalker Saga? And a lot of the answers are people saying they either don't care anymore or no because they can't imagine them getting it right and don't want his character tainted somehow. And please don't get me wrong here, I'm not upset that people were answering honestly and wanted to express the way they felt about the situation. That's kind of the point of the poll and the point of these Let's Talk Some Star Wars videos. Nor am I blaming the fans for the current situation the franchise finds itself in. And I think there's a real good chance next week's poll question will ask, where and with who do you think the blame lies for the current state of the franchise? And something tells me if I go that route, I'm going to get some really interesting comments to read through with that question. And if you're interested in participating, the poll should already be up if you're watching this now, and a link to it will be in the description below. But for now, let's get to a few more comments, starting with this one from Patrick Ulrich, who said, "The whole saga is basically his story. He needs to be in it whether you like his performance in the prequels or not." And again, this was something a lot of people touched on in the comments, that the performance of Hayden Christensen as Anakin in episodes 2 and 3 was, well, maybe not the greatest. Though there was also a lot of people, including Edwin De Jesus, in his comment here, who essentially placed the blame for that on the rough dialogue and poor directing skills of George Lucas, and not so much on the shoulders of Hayden Christensen. And I do tend to find myself in that camp, because I've seen Hayden in other things and he seems like a fine actor. And with proper direction and good dialogue to work with, I have little doubt that even though he's been away from acting for several years at this point, that he could pull off one, probably relatively short, yet very memorable scene in Episode 9. Next, let's get to a comment from Cameron Nelson, who said, "Anakin was always the chosen one. He needs to be in Episode 9 and he needs to have a big part in something that happens, whether that be wisdom or actually coming back and helping save the day. Anakin is where this all started. He needs to finish it." And that is very well said. And to go back to what I was saying earlier, I think JJ was setting up Anakin to have a significant part to play in this trilogy with what he did in The Force Awakens. One that maybe Rian Johnson wasn't as keen on, since one of the messages of his movie was to let the past die. And yeah, I know and acknowledge that there are plenty of fans out there who love The Last Jedi, and that's completely fine if you do. But for many other fans, myself included, it was a really odd direction to take the story in after The Force Awakens. It's really hard to see the Skywalker Saga not end where it all began, with Anakin Skywalker. Next comment now comes to us from Daz Davis, who said, "It has to end with him somehow. It has to, or you have no right to undo the ending of Return of the Jedi. Period." And I absolutely think you're right here. The hardest thing the sequels have had to do all along is to justify their own existence in terms of their place in the story, if you will. Because, yeah, Disney and Lucasfilm made sequels to make a ton of money off of them, and they've certainly done that. But if this trilogy doesn't enhance the two trilogies that came before it, if it doesn't ultimately give us a better, more satisfying ending than what we got with Return of the Jedi, if that's even possible, then ton of money made or not, you've only done harm to your franchise long term. Because in order to make all that money, you've angered and turned away a lot of your longtime customers who think you've committed something tantamount to sacrilege by undoing a perfect ending to give us one that's anything but. Alright, last comment we're going to get to here comes to us from Warren O'Brien, who simply said, "I just want it to be a good story. If Anakin fits in there, great." And all I can really say to that is, same here. Now, don't get me wrong, I'd love to see Anakin in there. I think he should be in there. But more importantly, I just want a good movie and a good end to this story. And yeah, I know a lot of people don't think that's even possible right now. And if that's the way you feel, I don't blame you. But you know what? Who knows what can happen? Let's not forget the biggest complaint levied against The Force Awakens was probably that it tried too hard to be an homage to the original trilogy. And maybe what J.J. Abrams will do with this last movie is to give us an homage to all of Star Wars, prequels included. And though that was a complaint a few years ago, when most of us were wanting something a little different and new out of Star Wars long before we got The Last Jedi, maybe getting another homage type movie and being reminded of what we love about Star Wars is exactly the sort of movie we need right now. And who knows if he can pull that off, but J.J. Abrams has said something to the effect that the end of this story, or Episode 9, will take into account all the previous movies, and that he wants to give us a satisfying conclusion to the whole story. So as long as he's being honest with us, and I assume he is, it does seem like his heart is in the right place with this movie. And the question then becomes, can his head pull off a story that most fans will enjoy? And will he bring back Anakin Skywalker to do it? Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about what I or anyone else had to say in this video. And again, I invite you to take part in the next poll, which will discuss who is at fault for the current state of the Star Wars franchise. And the link to that will be in the description below. Either way, until next time, thanks for watching.